So the Karifunan tribe is a big asset in terms of security for the Amazon rainforest. But what exactly are they or have they been defending the Amazon from? It's not as plain as outsider activity. Come on. And so I welcome you to the antagonist of this ordeal, Mr. Castelo Branco. Not the municipality in Portugal, the person. Mr. Castelo Branco was a Brazilian army chief who was inducted as such on the 11th of April, 1964. Given the power he had, he claimed that the Amazon rainforest was essentially some burden and some geographical disadvantage for the country, at least when Brazil didn't own the entire thing. So you see, 40% of South America is comprised of the Amazon rainforest, and at the time, 60% of the Amazon was owned by Brazil. Those are your numbers for reference. Now keep in mind, all of this is happening in a time where World War has relatively ended not too long ago, and power-hungry Brazil wanted to grow fast, and if they wanted to grow fast, they needed, urbanization, they needed expansion, yada yada yada. Castelo felt the need to have 100% ownership of the Amazon in order to allow for the expansion that Brazil needed. It's a very straightforward rulebook plot for power for the country. To fulfill his wishes, in 1964, he simply initiated the first coup d'etat that Brazil had experienced in its lifetime, aka the overthrowing of the government. The coup d'etat was a speed run in 2 days. It began March 31st, 1964, and ended April 1st. So the Brazilian army obliterated then President João Goulart, and thus Castelo Branco was officially named Chief/President of Brazil. A historic April Fool's prank for the ages. I mean, no one's topping this, come on. He literally said, "Oh my god, bro, our country only owns 60% of the world's biggest forest." Alright, that's it. I'm overthrowing the government.
He began operating the plans to take care of Brazil's major blind spot, but later died in an aircraft collision taking place on July 1967. But it was alright, as Arthur da Costa Silva became president right after and continued Castelo Branco's plans. Arthur da Costa Silva got together the major construction companies in the region and mapped out the area of Brazil. Using the sketches and ideas that Castelo Branco left behind, he used his tactics and list of names in order to begin construction and creation of the Trans-Amazonian Highway. Radio announcements were sent all over the country, especially from the more diverse and populated coastal cities. The country made sure to heavily advertise here in order to receive the full labor force this country had to offer. Citizens were promised land, money, and prosperity if they joined the country to whittle down the Amazon rainforest. As long as the citizen was making the land better, also known as cutting down trees and building homes, they got to keep whatever land they used. It was the greatest land grab and migration the country had ever seen. These citizens from the coastal cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo saw a fluctuating amount of their lower-class citizens making the move and traveling all the way to the outskirts of the rainforest and leveling it in days. In the upcoming years, more highways were built other than the Trans-Amazonian Highway, like Brasilia, Santorum, Rio Branco, and the Trans-Amazon. The Brazilian land rush in 1970 was the biggest form of urbanization, and such a fleet needed to be monitored by none other than INCRA, also known as the National Institute of Colonization and Agrarian Reform. These people walked around monitoring progression, moved and scavenged for resources like minerals for the country, checked up and overall helped the citizens even build certain structures like schools and town halls. They were single-handedly responsible for the colonization of the Amazon rainforest. Heck, the word colonization is in their name. It couldn't be more obvious that they were the bad guys. This institute overall helped establish now dangerous practices of cattle ranching, mineral mining, soybean production, and deforestation that led to the disasters faced then and that are still going on today. About 15% of the Amazon rainforest has already been destroyed and rivers drained due to these activities. The landscape has only been changed as the edge of the forest gets pushed back more and more, and what looks like a lush field of trees is now a flat field used for cattle grazing and farming. That brings us to the Karifunan people, the soon-to-be heroes of our plotline.
Let's get into a little history lesson. They are referred to as the Karifunan people as they are in a reality of mix of various Amerindians who fumbled in various tribes to sooner or later become known as one whole group with time. Their language of origin was Karipuna de Uwaka, but it was later taken over in the 1900s with the now new and mainly spoken language Amapa French Creole and Lac Boutois. The sad part about this change of language was a devastating blow into the tribe's history. The loss of their language, thanks to the flow of the Amerindians, meant that the oral stories told were lost. As more and more of the new generations were taught the new languages, the elders with the wisdom all just died out and were forgotten. Language was more than just a way to speak for them. It was how they told stories and taught about the lands. The sudden conversion disrupted all of that and forced them to move on.
As they proceeded to grow, they decided it was time to dissolve and went ahead and separated into 16 sectors or settlements all close by the Caribe River, where the leaders were to meet up time to time in order to catch up in current affairs, discuss any new discoveries, trade women, and obviously celebrate and host parties. The river was more for them. It was not only their way of life, but it was also their symbol of unity. Wherever the river flows, their spirit would be there. But as all communities are, even the Karipunian people had their odd ones out, as the only sectors not located by the Caribe River were Picua, Caribe, Korea, and Estrella, located along the BR-156 highway, as well as Aribama on the Oipoke River and Kunana on Jemina Creek. With the rivers comes little competition between the sectors, as they would regularly host fishing competitions among each other to catch fish like laulo catfish, golden tahira, piranhas, silver arowana, cara, peacock bass, and ari paima. When the competition gets really tough, they begin to venture off into the sea in order to find crabs and turtles. Sadly, the seaside competitions were recently stopped thanks to environmentalists. Even when it's dry season, these people find ways to have fun as communities and families as they work at clearing the new swidens. The men work in groups to fell the trees and clear the terrain from August to September and wait for strong sunshine to set fire to the land. On this occasion, meat and eggs from chameleons found in the burnt forest form part of the menu. By October and November, when the first rain falls, the swidens are ready for planting again, but this takes the efforts of the entire sector and sometimes other sectors.
These festivals culturas were a beautiful sight to see of inclusivity and unity, and here was set up mainly went. The village center will be decorated with feathers and red-colored flags, all tethered to a center point, and a center point will be located. The singers and musicians playing drums made out of surrounding wood and dry cow skin, and the flutes and windpipes will be sculpted out of branches. Meanwhile, the eldest shaman of the sectors and the leader who was sitting in the middle, while the village people would dance around them in a circle, holding hands. These festivals tended to be during full moons. The men's attire mainly consisted of red cloth wrapped around their waists and with leather rope crisscrossed on their chests, and the women had paint all over their bodies and a short red skirt alongside with a beaded bralette in order to attract the surrounding men. Now, for the food, they would eat the surplus amount of fish and fermented drinks, while the children had berry juices and some small birds caught along the way. It was a time of joyfulness and community, but the main idea of these festivals were not just to bring joy, but to bring unison, as the surrounding tribes like the Kalibi Maruana, the Palicor, and a small Gavi group will have their marriages here, and the tribe will once grow again, as they are classified as a mixed tribe, so adding more different tribes to a group of people will just strengthen their indigenous soup through marriage.
This open-mindedness was tested. In 1934, 2 female teachers were sent into the Amazon to overall teach any tribes that they may face. Unlike others, these women made sure they were clean and sanitized their belongings before their adventures. They sooner or later stumbled upon Espiritu Santo village on the Curipe River and at Santa Maria dos Calibis on the Yuaca River. These ladies recorded about their way of life and observed in the beginning, except their notes were biased as they referred to them as simple and savage. Soon enough, they began modernizing these 2 sectors. They exposed them to both shirts and pants, and also continuing to disinfect everything. The women began to push more religion on top of what they already were exposed to by the Armenians. They even tried building a schoolhouse. Oh, hell no! This was the government trying to secretly change these people, refurbish them into their ideals, overall ignoring and compromising any chance of transmitting and sharing ideas. There was no sharing, just recording and pushing of modern ideals. Luckily, these women were sent away after 5 years as they were understanding enough to realize that they were not welcome anymore. It just goes to prove that we can't teach these people as we come from a different lifestyle. The Karipuna tribe are the only ones who know their form of knowledge, and it's our decision to respect it or ignore it. While the knowledge that they do hold is not as revolutionary or exciting as other tribes known to man, it's not their traditions or way of life that makes them interesting. It's their ideals and overall actions that make these people so wonderful, and it's important and necessary that need to be protected at all costs.
During the beginning of the expansion and urbanization of the rainforest, the government sent an expedition deep into the Amazon in 1976 to map out the location of any savage tribe people that may be lurking while it continued to move deeper with the land rush. Once the Karapuna people were discovered, they were joyful actually. They greeted these explorers with open hands, fed them, and even allowed them to stay the night, as it was custom in their culture to greet visitors. This soon to be the biggest event in their lives. Over the upcoming years, more and more of Katika's people from her section will sooner or later pass away due to newly brought illnesses that the explorers brought, and others died during the attempt to flee due to starvation and natural causes from the wildlife around them. At the end of it, only 8 of her section, including herself, survived the exposure to the modern world. Other sections of Karipuna people faced the same fate, and some had no survivors at all. It is just a fate many tribes face, and the Karipuna people were no exception. It was not for nothing though, as Katika Karipuna used her experience to communicate with their sectors, and together they were able to fight for their right to keep their land. The Karipuna people were not backing down for anything, as they fought long and hard with the state and farmers until the state overall gave in and provided a protected reservation in 1998 the size of New York just for the entirety of the tribe in the Brazilian state residence of Rondônia. Katika Karipuna was able to lead her people into prosperity. But just because they were safe, it did not mean that there wasn't any work to do. Next generation came in with full force. Meet the new chief leader of the current generation of the Brazilian Karipuna people, Adriano Karipuna. But before his transitional power to chief, he worked with the prior chief, Katika Karipuna, and discussed with Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, upon his election in 2003, and Brazil's environment minister, Marina Silva. Except by this time, the environment minister actually started making some changes to the environment. Both Karipuna leaders went in requesting protection for not only themselves, but the national regions where endangered animals and other tribes people reside. The reason was due to farmers secretly expanding their territories and outright ignoring the laws put in place. So President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva sent out IBAMA, the Brazilian Institute of Environment and Renewable Natural Resources. IBAMA troops were sent out to guard these areas' edges from anyone who dares cross the designated borders and swiftly put them down. They were successful and occasionally checked up on the Karipuna people in order to work together and report any type of incident so Brazil could begin an investigation. The Karipuna people were absolutely fearless and powerful people. There have been reports of them attacking loggers and driving them away, assisting with wildfires, rescuing and protecting other wildlife around them, and overall being the true guardians of the rainforest. Although Brazilians destroyed their homes upon encounter and nearly killed all of them off due to diseases, they were not giving up or stopping. During the presidency of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, together they were able to achieve various feats in the 8 years that he was in office to further stop the growth of the now known arc of deforestation where the damage was being done. They rose a number of protected reserves not only for reservations and wildlife but also for sustainable use reserves where we farm and use what the land gave us, and that of which could be quickly replenished, making the Amazon more community not needed to be destroyed, and it led to an overall 42% of the rainforest being put in protection, nearly half in the upcoming years. Upon this astonishing accomplishment, they proceeded to work on raising the forest code, meaning that any land bought or used had to now hold at least 20% of the land's natural resources, whether it be trees or bushes. 20% of that needed to remain, but that wasn't enough. So Adriano Karipuna set out to find help from the outside world, not only from Brazil, but from other nations and states. Adriano talked in the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous People, which was set up and sponsored by HEVOS in cooperation with Greenpeace to allow his voice to be heard. Here he made clear of the issue and struggles they were facing and how cattle production needed to be restricted. But due to demands by our fast food chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's, and other chains, it will never stop. Thus began an agreement to further act upon soy and beef moratoriums, meaning that these chains in these countries could only purchase beef from certain farms and no new farm could be created or added without a hefty fee from the state and country of which it resides. Adriano Karipuna, like the chief before him, is continuing to fight and continuing to give his people prosperity. Prosperity for their children and the land that they stand on.
The Karapunan people will continue to fight and won't allow anyone to stop them. Whether it be at the cost of their lives, they will prevail once again, as they are the Karapunan people, protectors of the Amazon rainforest.